On this Tuesday night, questions about rail safety again. How did a parked train end up careening off the rails, killing all three on board?
There was not anything the crew did to the train started to move on its own.
What it says about the risks of getting Canada's resources to market.
Oposición y chavista,
Sí.
juntos.
Venezuela on the brink, Ottawa warning Canadians to stay out. So how is Nicolas Maduro clinging to power? The fear of invasion that's gripping these streets.
And Trump's State of the Union.
Walls work and walls save lives. So let's work together, compromise, and reach a deal.
Unifying language after years of personal attacks and bitter division. But will the change in tone be a lasting one? Our panel of U.S. political insiders breaks it all down. This is The National Post.
Investigators are zeroing in on why a freight train derailed yesterday in the Rocky Mountains, sending the crew members plunging to their deaths. The Transportation Safety Board knows the train was stopped for a crew change when the brakes released. The question is, why? The incident has put rail safety back in the spotlight in Canada when train traffic is on the rise. The CBC's Aaron Collins has new details on how the crash unfolded.
From the air, it looks like a scar on the land, the spot where dozens of rail cars left the track, sliding to a creek bed at the bottom of Cathedral Mountain. On the ground, today started just as yesterday ended, workers removing mangled rail cars from this valley, while investigators try to determine just what happened here.
Preliminary indications are that a loss of control of the train occurred.
The Transportation Safety Board says it's too early to say what caused that loss of control, but some details about what happened before the crash are emerging.
The train had been stopped on the grade with the air brakes in emergency for about 2 hours when the train began to move on its own. There were no handbrakes applied on the train.
The TSB says that stop was to make a crew change near the BC-Alberta border. Once the train started moving on its own, it was moving fast, accelerating for about 3 kilometers before hitting a curve, derailing and tumbling down an embankment to the frigid creek bed below.
The winding stretch of track that makes its way through this rugged part of the Rockies has always been a dangerous one, in part because of the steep grade trains have to make their way down on their way into Field, BC.
Another train crashed here last month. No one died in that derailment, but the union representing the dead CP employees says 8 rail workers have died in Canada since November 2017, and they want more done to keep them safe, something the federal government says it already does.
It's always a possibility that accidents or derailments will happen. We're trying to make it as safe as possible, and we will continue to make that our priority.
The cleanup will continue here in the coming days as investigators search for the train's event recorders, tasks made more difficult by the frigid weather and rugged terrain that may have played a role in this tragedy. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
As we mentioned, this derailment comes at a time when trains are carrying an increasing number of goods. More than 313 million tons of products were moved by rail in 2017, and that's an increase of 7% over the year before, the strongest growth in years. Much of the increase is due to petroleum, and with a glut of oil in Alberta and plans for the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion stalled, the province is seeking to buy as many as 7,000 rail cars to get its crude to market, and that's prompting concerns from some about the safety standards for rail cars carrying dangerous goods. And Alberta's Premier addressed this issue tonight in our national conversation in Edmonton. Rachel Notley says she feels the pipelines are the safest way to transport oil and gas products.
We all know that many goods are shipped each and every day on rail throughout the country. But quite frankly, what all Albertans want is for our products to be shipped by pipelines.
And we'll have in-depth coverage from Alberta later in the hour, including more from the Premier and an interview with her political rival, Jason Kenney.
Okay, to Washington now, where Donald Trump wrapped his second State of the Union address, but it was his first since Democrats took over the House.
The agenda I will lay out this evening is not a Republican agenda or a Democrat agenda. It's the agenda of the American people.
So plenty of talk about unity and bipartisanship. Question is, will that last? From the economy to the border wall, much of what Trump was saying tonight treads on familiar ground. But he's also making news, announcing his next meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un in Vietnam at the end of the month. Paul Hunter has been watching the address, joins us now from Washington. So Paul, what's been the takeaway here?
Yeah, well, Donald Trump's been under pressure to take a different approach when it comes to the seriously divided politics in this country. And he certainly gave a nod to that tonight with the kind of language not often heard from Donald Trump of, putting country ahead of party. He even gave a shout out to all the freshly elected women in that room tonight, most of them Democrats who, are you ready, stood up and applauded Trump for that. It was quite a moment. Indeed, it's a fresh and emboldened opposition for Trump on Capitol Hill. And so he talked about compromise. But this is Donald Trump. And so compromise doesn't necessarily include him not getting his way on a variety of issues. At one point, he framed it by, if you want a thriving America, you got to give a little. Here's how he put it.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations. If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation.
Unite at home, his way, he said, to defeat enemies abroad.
And Paul, a lot of expectations he would restate his push for the border wall tonight.
Yeah, and he did. Walls work, he said, and walls save lives. And for the record, he redefined what he means by wall. As he put it, smart, see-through steel barriers, and in areas where there is, as he put it, the greatest need. Apparent implication, not necessarily coast to coast. He implored Democrats, let's work together and reach a deal. And he spent a lot of time describing, as he has in the past, what he sees as the major threat posed by undocumented migrants, which for many remains up for debate. Can they get a deal on the wall with another government shutdown over that looming? Tonight, his message, let's try.
Looming potentially 10 days away. Paul Hunter from Washington, thanks so much. Now, following Trump's address, the Democrats then had their chance to speak. Typically, the party uses the response to highlight a rising star. And tonight, it was Stacey Abrams who ran for governor in Georgia. She made history as the first black woman to give a response to the State of the Union, and she shared a very different vision of America.
In this time of division and crisis, we must come together and stand for and with one another. America has stumbled time and again on its quest towards justice and equality. But with each generation, we have revisited our fundamental truths, and where we falter, we make amends.
Now, whether you're talking about what Democrats or Republicans say, there's also the question of who's been invited to listen, and every choice is political. Consider Trump's guest list. Among them, the family of a Nevada couple killed last month by an undocumented immigrant, and an 11-year-old who happens to share the Trump last name and who says he gets bullied for it. Democrats, too, are making a statement, inviting the father of a Parkland shooting victim as well as a Parkland survivor.
To the leaders, skeptics, and cynics, welcome to the revolution.
Others are bringing federal workers hit hard by the government shutdown, and remember this.
Look at me when I'm talking to you.
The woman who confronted Republican Senator Jeff Flake in an elevator during the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. She'll be in the crowd tonight. And so will a former undocumented immigrant who worked at one of Trump's golf courses. And so our coverage just getting started. We're going to be breaking down what Trump said in his State of the Union address in about 15 minutes' time. Our U.S. political insiders will weigh in on what they've heard so far. But now, let's go to Venezuela. Once again tonight, Adrian Arsenault is inside the country. Adrian.
Andrew, as of tonight, Ottawa is warning Canadians to avoid all travel here to Venezuela. That's just a recognition of how combustible things are here right now. The would-be president, Juan Guaido, may have the recognition of a number of international players, but inside Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro remains very much in charge, so both are really playing to their strengths.
Hay que tomar las previsiones para que llegue a los más necesitados. Hay 300,000 venezolanos en riesgo de muerte en este momento si no ingresa esa ayuda humanitaria.
That's Guaido trying to be seen as a solution to the country's dire need. Today, he renewed his call for aid to be let into the country, already on its way from the U.S. Maduro dismissed that as a false promise. Instead of foreign aid, he's raising the specter of foreign invasion. And supporters hear that message loud and clear all the way down to the streets. To get where you need to be in Caracas is to pass the eyes everywhere, looking over, looking down, keeping watch. Especially in neighborhoods like this one, that was, is, and may continue to be a Chavista stronghold, firmly behind Nicolas Maduro. Not that they don't have complaints.
Esa problemática. Esa es una problemática que sí tiene solución.
This is a battle over who's to blame for there being no water here. For years, they've had to trudge up and down the hillside, drawing from a single tap. So life is hard, but hard enough to step away from Maduro and towards Juan Guaido? No. Now, here, the worry is war. In this moment, this man says, I feel the greatest difficulty is that the threat is real and Donald Trump is at the front of the threat. Whatever doubts they had about their president before, some just instinctively protect him now. So one man we spoke with here who's a Maduro supporter says that he explains all the enthusiasm you've seen on the streets for Guaido in the last 10 days or so is really nothing more than a phase, and it's his belief that as the days go on, the enthusiasm goes down. He says that's just his view, but you hear it a lot here. Largely because you hear it a lot here. Venezuelan state television is stirring invasion panic, seeding the message that Guaido is losing steam, suggesting he is for an American invasion. He said that's not true. But rousing images like these are everywhere. The very idea of outside intervention just evokes that mix of fear and patriotism that Maduro feeds on now. The loyal Chavistas are entirely on edge. And as firm as you can be that invaders aren't welcome. The gracious Maria Lourdes was eager to talk with us to explain she is steaming mad. If the Yankees come, she says they'd have to kill everybody. Does she think they'll invade?
No.
No. I have faith in God. We have help. Russia, China won't allow it because the oil deposits are ours, and with those, we'll keep moving forward. The loyal to Maduro have been primed to expect war and war led by Americans for a very long time. He is setting this up as an existential fight, and that's how they see this moment too. And just a note about that advisory from Ottawa tonight warning against travel here. Venezuela is now the only country in the Western Hemisphere to have that designation from Canada. Other countries on the list around the world include Mali, Afghanistan, and North Korea. And with that, let's head back to Toronto.
All right, Adrian, I want to turn now to a grisly case that got the attention of an entire country. Today, Bruce McArthur was given a chance to address the court about the 8 men he killed in cold blood. But he declined. So we may never understand his motives or his state of mind. But what we did see again today were the emotional wounds inflicted on his victims' loved ones. Ioana Remiliotis has their stories.
In this spectacle of horror, they have always been so private, those closest to the victims. Today, glimpses of their anguish. Richard Kikot was a friend of Salim Essens.
In the moment when whatever was happening between him and Bruce McArthur, and he realized that this was going down. That terrifies me, and I can't help thinking about that. Just like what was in his heart at that moment, he must have been terrified.
Tangled in this sordid story, they are the most broken. Friends, mothers, brothers, wives. Court heard one emotional victim impact statement after another. From a friend of Skandaraj Navaratnam. Having someone that I loved dearly killed is another level of loss and life-changing. It puts your spirit and faith into question. From Majid Kahan's brother. I don't know that I can properly describe the pain and suffering that I and my family have gone through over the years, and I believe that this suffering will continue to affect us forever. From Abdul Basir Faizi's wife. My daughters suffer terribly knowing what happened to their father. They pretend to be strong in front of me, but when they are alone in their room, they take a picture of their father with them. I hear them crying. Wrenching to hear, too, when Farina Marzouk started sobbing as the Crown read out her statement. I was overwhelmed with grief as I could not eat nor sleep. I was no longer interested in the activities that I enjoyed prior to getting the news of my husband's disappearance. These symptoms appeared to be a continuation of an emotional reaction to the trauma and grief of losing my soulmate. Complicating that pain, many of the victims came from conservative backgrounds and led double lives. Their horrific murders outed them. Karushna Kumar Kanagaratnam's family, here from Sri Lanka, say they can't fathom how he crossed paths with a gay serial killer. They're beyond brokenhearted.
No sleeping every day. There's a angry. There's a very, very bad situation. My family or my.
Especially Kanagaratnam's mother.
She's crying always. She keeps on crying.
The Crown referenced that pain often, calling the case haunting, the crimes abhorrent. In court, arguing McArthur should serve at least 2 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole for 50 years, a guarantee he would die in prison and spare families from the endless prospect of a parole hearing.
And Joanna, on that point, what's the defense saying?
The defense is arguing that that is unduly harsh and says McArthur should serve all his sentences concurrently. That means serve them all at once, and he would be up for parole in 25 years when he's 91.
And do we have any indication as to what the judge in this case thinks?
We're certainly getting hints because Justice John McMahon several times today mentioned the fact that by pleading guilty, McArthur did spare the families the trauma of a trial and that he is struggling with what value to place on that. The Crown acknowledged, yes, that is true, but countered that by saying McArthur didn't stop killing, he was caught.
Okay, thanks, Joanna.
You're welcome.
Now, as Joanna said, if Bruce McArthur receives the recommended sentence, he will surely die in prison. And those longer than life sentences have a long history in the U.S., where some are measured in centuries, but they're fairly new to Canada.
We, as a country, noticed a problem in terms of the sentences that were being handed out for multiple murderers, and we changed it.
In 2013, for killing 3 co-workers, Travis Baumgartner was given no chance of parole for 40 years. It was Canada's harshest sentence since the repeal of capital punishment made possible by the Harper government. You see, families of victims had long argued that when multiple life sentences for multiple murders were served at the same time, it devalued the life of each individual victim. So in 2011, judges were given the option to stack up those 25-year periods of parole ineligibility. Since then, at least 5 of Canada's most notorious killers have been sentenced to no parole for at least 75 years.
Here are some of the developing stories we're watching tonight. French police have opened a criminal investigation after a fire killed at least 10 people and left dozens more injured. This fire broke out at the 9-story apartment building in Paris early this morning. Residents tried to escape out their windows and off balconies. It took about 250 firefighters almost 5 hours to bring the fire under control. A 40-year-old woman who lives in the building and who had a dispute with a neighbor is in custody.
And it really shocked me, this primal urge I had.
Actor Liam Neeson apologizing today for racially charged comments he made earlier this week. Tonight, the studio canceled the New York premiere of his film Cold Pursuit. In an interview on Monday, Neeson told a reporter he'd wanted to kill randomly a black man in response to the rape of a close friend more than 40 years ago. Today, Neeson said no violence occurred and that he sought help from a priest.
And ahead tonight on The National, we go in depth on Donald Trump's State of the Union. Our panel of U.S. political insiders are here to help separate the substance from the spectacle.
And a little later, as The National looks at the future of Alberta, Rosemary sits down with Jason Kenney, the man who hopes to be Alberta's next premier.
First, though, we'll take you to Northern Ireland, where tensions over Brexit and fears of violence are reopening old wounds.
One of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life is to tell my son on his 18th birthday on the phone that the IRA had murdered his daddy.
Northern Ireland does not have to rely on the Irish government or the European Union to prevent a return to borders of the past. The UK government will not let that happen. I will not let that happen.
British Prime Minister Theresa May made a rare trip to Northern Ireland today to ease growing concerns there about Brexit. May told Belfast business leaders that she's headed to Brussels later this week to try to fix her failed plan. The UK's divorce from the European Union is scheduled to happen on March 29th, and if a deal isn't done by then, customs and border checks could go up between the UK's Northern Ireland and its EU neighbour, the Republic of Ireland. Just the chance that could happen is raising fears across Northern Ireland about a return to violence, especially in a city that's already seen too much of it. Thomas Dagla has that story from Londonderry.
This city has got a long memory. Its troubled history remembered in song for those like Conor McGuinty, too young to recall the violence himself.
With their tanks and their guns.
This has always been his image of Londonderry, or Derry as they would call it, a city with two names to reflect long-standing divisions.
We went through a period of nearly, 20 years now, nearly, of peace. And it's been torn apart, really, by Brexit.
McGuinty was driving by this courthouse on a recent Saturday night when he narrowly avoided disaster. He spotted that car parked outside, didn't think much of it. Somebody took off running. Then this happened. A bombing, the likes of which Londonderry hadn't seen in years.
It was scary, especially with my son in the car. He's only 1.
A couple weeks have gone by since the explosion, but the scars in the street remain, showing how powerful a blast it was. A group calling itself the IRA claimed responsibility, saying Brexit had nothing to do with it. But the timing, with Brexit looming, suggests a more complicated story. The writings on the wall all over this city, reminders of the Troubles, and especially Bloody Sunday riots here, when the British Army opened fire on protesters, inflaming the sectarian divide and providing dissident Republicans with fodder to this day.
While Britain continues to occupy Ireland, there will be men and women who are willing to engage Britain with armed actions.
It's like Brexit is rubbing salt on old wounds, with the threat of a hard border in full view and a solution still out of reach.
I would not wish anybody to suffer the pain that I suffered.
For Kathleen Gillespie, the nightmare is still real. On a dark night in 1990, IRA militants showed up at her front door, kidnapped her husband Patsy, then forced him to drive a massive bomb to the border. When it blew up, it killed him and 5 nearby soldiers, leaving his family scarred forever.
One of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life is to tell my son on his 18th birthday on the phone that the IRA had murdered his daddy. And next thing I heard him screaming.
No one says it will come to that again, but it's such a volatile moment in history, a warning.
The law of unintended consequences has been one of the main laws of Irish history going back centuries. Right? Nothing works out the way people expect it to work out.
The fear is this city's future could look awfully like its past. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Londonderry, Northern Ireland.
Ahead tonight on The National, the Oscars says it solved its host problem. The solution? Something not seen on the show for decades.
First, though, we'll turn our attention back to Washington and what you should take away from Donald Trump's State of the Union address. Our panel of political insiders straight ahead.
Now, Republicans and Democrats must join forces again to confront an urgent national crisis
Donald Trump makes his case for the border wall to Congress and to the American people. Tonight, a week later than he'd planned, the U.S. president gave his State of the Union address calling for unity and security. Now, to help us dig into Trump's speech, we turn to our panel of U.S. political insiders. David Frum is a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Elena Beverly is a former Obama White House official. And Jay Shabria is a Republican strategist. Hello to the three of you. So we've got lots to go through, so let's get right to it. And David, maybe I'll start with you. We'll just do a quick go around. You know a thing or two about writing a good speech. What do you think of what you heard?
The president didn't have a plan. He didn't know why he was there. He didn't know what he was trying to accomplish. Sometimes he was trying to rouse his base. Sometimes he was vaguely nagging the Democrats about working with them, but not offering anything that they could agree to. I think the sense of internal indiscipline was showcased by the enormous length and by the fact that the president could not remember at the beginning that he's supposed to wait to be invited to talk by the Speaker of the House, and then he's supposed to address her. He completely forgot about all of that.
Jay, I'm going to let you have a take on that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a pretty disjointed speech, and I'm not sure what the main takeaway is from it. But what I would say is in the second half of the speech, there was this definite populist tone. When you talk about the cost of prescription drugs, you talk about infrastructure, NAFTA, border security, infrastructure, those types of things. There's that populist tone that he's trying to strike, that he's always struck through his presidency, and that's the thing that I think will be remembered for the speech.
And Elena, there was a lot that was tackled in this speech. What stood out for you?
Well, it stood out for me that fear-mongering was still a centerpiece of this speech. Immigration was about 14 minutes of the speech, and throughout it, it was flagging for everyone that our migrant communities are ramp criminals and causing harm to the security of the country, even though the vast majority of them are seeking asylum at the border. And then, for me, what stands out is the claim that we would be at war with North Korea, but for President Trump's savior. So the fear-mongering stood out for me.
Okay, North Korea is certainly one issue, but just on what you were saying a moment ago, let's talk about the border wall. So have a listen to what Donald Trump said in his address about that.
This is a moral issue. The lawless state of our southern border is a threat to the safety, security, and financial well-being of all America. We have a moral duty to create an immigration system that protects the lives and jobs of our citizens.
And Jay, he also made mention of large organized caravans on the march. Tell me, who is he speaking to there in that moment? Is it Americans at large, or is it his base, or someone else entirely?
Well, he's speaking to his base first and foremost. That's usually the first audience he looks at. But this issue of immigration, even when you talk about caravans, cuts across America. There's a sense that America's immigration system is broken. And until the Democrats, which they've been unable to come to the table with any type of solution, actually do say, this is what we're for, they're going to be perceived as being for open borders. And this is largely a win for the president when he talks about these kinds of things.
But even within the Republican Party, right, there's disagreement about whether a border wall is the way to go about it.
The wall's a symbol. The wall is whatever Donald Trump wants it to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be a concrete barrier. He can claim victory anytime he wants to. But this issue, basically, if the longer he keeps it going, the longer he has the Democrats saying, we don't want anything, and that means that they're for open borders.
Elena,
what's so crazy about that? What's so crazy about that, though, is in that same speech, President Trump, now of course he doesn't ever mean it, but he still said it, it's in the speech, called for raising immigration numbers to the highest levels ever seen in history. So if you are someone who is concerned about immigration, look, I actually tend to have restrictionist views on immigration. Those of us who care about immigration think the problem is not that the illegal immigration part is so violent and chaotic, it's that the total level numbers of people coming into the country, given the states of artificial intelligence and what's happening to robotics, those numbers are too big. But the president said, the problem that you actually have, I'm going to make it worse, and the problem that we don't have, I'm going to spend billions of dollars to not solve that.
But Elena, is there anything that the president could have said in this particular address that the Democrats would have been receptive to hearing?
I think that if he had begun by saying that there are alternatives to a wall, again, using technology, other forms of surveillance at the border, I think those would have actually resonated with the Democrats. But I will say this: starting off with the moral issue requires us to clamp down on immigration. That just rings hollow when it comes from the mouth of the president who has ripped children away from their families and put them in cages at the border. He just has no moral authority to speak to morality when it comes to security and immigration at the border.
And his own companies have been revealed in the past week to be huge employers of illegal labor. One of the reason that illegal aliens come to the United States is to work illegally. They couldn't do that if there weren't illegal employers who didn't care about the status of their employees. And what we've learned in the past week is that 5 of the Trump golf clubs have been employing illegal labor. In the case of his club in Westchester, the illegal workers were a majority of the employees. For the president then to say this is the crisis of our time, and 2 years into his own, it's only 2 years into his own administration that he began to do something about it in his own enterprises.
Right.
How much of a moral issue can that be?
So clearly, I mean, this is a divisive issue, right? On the issue of bridge building and cooperation and compromise, let's have a listen to what the president said about unity.
We must reject the politics of revenge, resistance, and retribution, and embrace the boundless potential of cooperation, compromise, and the common good.
Okay, so Jay, we had the bad R words, we had the good C words.
Yeah.
But the backdrop, of course, is the ticking time bomb, right? The fact that another government shutdown could be coming in as few as 10 days.
Yeah, look, I don't think the president can allow another government shutdown. He got vastly outmaneuvered by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats the last time, and it hurt his numbers, and it hurt his numbers in a way that actually might have a lasting effect. So it is in his best interest to try to figure this out, claim victory for the wall, claim victory on some of this border funding, and move on with the things that he knows that he can start to win.
Let's explore this issue of building consensus by running another clip. This is something that the president said on the subject of a very contentious topic, abortion.
To defend the dignity of every person, I am asking Congress to pass legislation to prohibit the late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in a mother's womb.
David, what's the thinking there in bringing that up?
That's not a consensus building. That is absolutely red meat for the base. And this takes place in this context, which is one of the justices of the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, seems to be in poor health. And while we all wish her well, it's quite possible that President Trump will, before he leaves office, appoint Ruth Bader Ginsburg's successor. If that happens, he has the opportunity to create a court majority that will decisively overturn Roe versus Wade. Right now, there's theoretically a 5-4 conservative majority on the court, but the Chief Justice, John Roberts, doesn't like to do big precedent-breaking decisions. But one more conservative justice, and it could happen. And so people are going to be watching. If the president is so interested in consensus, does he nominate, should that time come, a consensus-type judge, or does he go for the gusto, as he's done with his 2 previous nominees? That legislation that he's talked about won't have any effect so long as Roe versus Wade is there. We are jostling now for the post-Roe environment, and we'll see what the president's intentions are about that.
Elena, I can see you want to chime in on this.
Well, so, I mean, actually, the legislation that he's talking about out of Virginia never made it out of committee. So he's in part referring to legislation in New York, but his larger point about respecting the dignity of every person apparently, in his mind, doesn't actually apply to women, the women who would actually carry a child. And in this instance, the legislation in Virginia would have simply made the decision about an abortion be that of a woman and her doctor. So I think that this is, again, the reproductive rights have been an area of division since time began. And so he's not, this is him moving away from a spirit of unity toward division. And I also believe it is a flag to the states to suggest to them that this is their time to pass legislation that would curtail the rights of women in favor of a fetus.
And Jay, very quickly, I want to let you just chime in.
Just remember, the backdrop of this was the governor of Virginia, who was embroiled in a whole nother scandal, starting this off by talking about how infanticide was okay. And so late-term abortions is actually kind of a universal place where people say, you know what, we need to get rid of those. So I would actually find fault with David on this. I think there's a lot of consensus behind getting rid of late-term abortions, and on a very narrow way there.
We have 15 seconds left. David, I want to let you have the final word. Just on the question of Trump's capacity to expand his support between tonight and 2020.
He's hoping only to get back to 45%. One of the things Canadians need to pay attention to is that Trump threatened more trade wars. The question is, will he have the votes in Congress to back him up as the U.S.-Canada trade agreement comes for a vote in Congress? He talks about it as if it's a done deal. It ain't a done deal.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been fabulous talking to you. David, Elena, Jay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next on The National, we continue our special coverage from Alberta with a conversation with Jason Kenney, the man who will be vying for the province's top job.
What would you be doing differently in this position if you were Premier? What should the Premier be doing differently?
I think our Premier made a huge mistake.
Albertans have taken to the streets to make their voices heard and delivered letters pleading with the Prime Minister for help. Angry over the effect of the low price of Canadian crude, cuts to domestic oil production, and stalled pipeline plans.
It's depressing because, I mean, a lot of these people that you've been with forever are having trouble.
Last night we took you to Drayton Valley, a former boom town in the province, now struggling.
If nothing changes, well, you'll see a lot less tax base coming out of here, tax money. A lot of the shops will be shut down.
And the town isn't alone. Tonight, our coverage of the challenges facing Alberta continues with a provincial election just around the corner and a federal election set for the fall. Rosemary sat down with someone you'll likely hear a lot from in the coming months. Jason Kenney was a longtime MP and cabinet minister under Stephen Harper. Now he's looking to lead Alberta into the future as Premier.
It's very clear the economy is struggling here in Alberta, that there are a lot of people who are personally struggling, that tens of thousands of people have been laid off. What do you think is the biggest issue that is facing Alberta right now?
We've gone through the longest period of economic decline and stagnation, at least since the 1930s. Monthly payrolls are down by 10% over 4 years ago, or per capita GDP down 7%. But behind those numbers, a huge number of folks have gone from reliable six-figure incomes to unreliable piecemeal and contract work. A lot of young people leaving the province, and just a sense of also a little bit of sense of being under siege. There's something psychological about it. Albertans are kind of get-her-done people, very much pride themselves on the entrepreneurial spirit that's driven this province, and a sense that, we've been good neighbors in the Federation. We've been very generous. We've contributed $200 billion to the rest of the Federation through our federal taxes over the past 2 decades, and yet there seem to be political forces that don't want us to develop the resources that pay the bills. So both economically and politically, a lot of frustration.
Let's talk about pipelines just for a minute. The federal government is now consulting with Indigenous communities. They've had some 60 meetings, and so they're working towards trying to get this thing going. What would you be doing differently in this position if you were Premier? What should the Premier be doing differently?
I think our Premier made a huge mistake when she signaled to Justin Trudeau that he could kill Northern Gateway and surrender to Obama's veto on Keystone XL, And Alberta did nothing to protest the Trudeau Liberals effectively killing Energy East through new regulatory mandates. Still, we're left with just one, the faint hope of one coastal pipeline. We should not have been in this position. Now, obviously,
I know, but how can a premier stop the federal government from making what it believes are the best decisions for all kinds of reasons? I mean, I don't know what she could have done.
I think the job of an Alberta premier is to defend the province's vital economic interests and waving the white flag on 3 out of 4 potential coastal pipelines was not in our best interests. And we backed ourselves into this corner where the pipeline opponents have enormous leverage over us. Obviously, federal government has to do the supplementary consultations, but they should also have appealed that decision to the Supreme Court to get clarity on the duty to consult. And I think they could have laid down the federal supremacy on this issue. You know, invoke Section 92 of the Constitution. This is an interprovincial pipeline, exclusive federal jurisdiction. The government of British Columbia has no business threatening to block it by withholding permits and litigation and these other things that caused Kinder Morgan to walk away.
What do you want Canadians to know about what's happening here? You know, we see people protesting the yellow vests. We don't know, you know, is this a real movement? What does it stand for? We see people protesting against Bill C-69. We see people really struggling to find jobs. There's all sorts of stories.
A lot of frustration.
Yeah, a lot of frustration. So what should the rest of us in central Canada and other places, eastern Canada, what should we understand about what's happening here and why that should matter to the rest of us so much?
First, let's not be distracted by a small number of yellow vest people who might have extreme views. The vast majority of folks showing up at tens of thousands at rallies and protests are just what Ralph Klein would have called severely normal Albertans who would never go to a protest in their whole lives. They're just working people who feel like they've played by the rules, they've paid their taxes, we've been generous in the Federation, and now that we just can't seem to get a break. What those Albertans are saying is we Albertans are proud to be have been an engine in the Canadian economy, to have been a great engine of social mobility with the highest levels of employment for people with modest levels of education, highest levels of employment and income for Aboriginal people, sharing $20 billion a year net with the rest of the Federation. We're proud to have played that role and share our prosperity when times are good here and bad elsewhere. But all we ask is that governments and politicians who benefit from the resources developed from the hard work of Albertans allow us to sell those products, displace foreign oil imports from Eastern Canada, get it to global markets, get a fair price. A strong Alberta is essential for a strong Canada. We're talking about trillions of dollars of potential wealth. There's a growing global demand, whether people like it or not, for oil and gas through at least the year 2040, according to the International Energy Agency. Either we will be part of supplying that growing demand, or we're going to leave it to the OPEC dictatorships. I think it's good for the world, and it's great for Canada if we can strengthen this federation by allowing Alberta to sell those assets to the world.
So that's where Jason Kenney stands, and tonight Premier Rachel Notley took questions directly from Canadians in a special national conversation. We'll bring you highlights tomorrow on the National, but here's a sample of what she had to say.
I think that we have been standing up for Alberta since day one. We have been pushing for this pipeline since day one. I, like all Albertans, like everybody in this room, I'm sure, are very frustrated with the decision that we got in August, which delayed what otherwise was a pipeline under construction for the first time in almost 70 years in the country of Canada. So, but that is the federal courts, and that is not a thing that I can fight against. When it comes to pushing the federal government, there is no question that Canada works best when we all work together.
It is official. After Kevin Hart's drawn-out resignation as host of the Academy Awards, this year's Oscars will have no host. A big change for the Hollywood institution, and so we've made it our moment.
So, here's the deal. You gotta keep smiling.
Keep smiling indeed. When nominees gathered yesterday for the traditional class photo, there was still hope that some host would be found. After all, in the past, it was almost a full-time job. Johnny Carson, 5 times. Billy Crystal, 9. Bob Hope, 19. Now, welcome to the gig economy. This job moves around like a seat filler on awards night. The Oscars went hostless 30 years ago when Rob Lowe's excruciating song and dance left Snow White pining for apples. Oscars gone for 2 hosts, and the results were surprisingly bland and sometimes downright bizarre. What was James Franco smoking? The final word when it comes to no hosts versus multiple hosts? You probably know where this show stands. And so, Andrew, what would the moment be without not just a host, but multiple hosts? What's your feeling on this issue?
Well, can I just let it be known that as far as the Oscars hosting gig goes, I think it'd be kind of fun. But then, the funny thing, so I looked at our schedules for hosting. Sunday, February 24th, the night of the Oscars, of the 4 of us, I am the only one hosting our program that night. So I'm the only one who can't do it.
All right, and if you were to pick a host for the Oscars, we talked a moment ago, you actually have an intriguing choice.
The Rock, I think, would be a great choice. Like he's endearing, he's non-controversial, he's funny. What about you?
Well, I feel pressure to be even more intriguing than that, so I will say, and I know this is not a great guess, but I love the sitcom The Grinder. Give Rob Lowe a second chance, I say.
Okay, interesting.
All right, okay, what terrible guesses. Nobody cares what we think about this, but anyway. The 2 hosts say good night. That is The National for February the 5th.
Good night.